In this lesson, you're going to learn how to set up custom environment variables for your Node.js applications. Now, our application is actually already using an environment variable. Inside of index.js, we access process.env. This is where environment variables are stored, and we access the port environment variable, which is provided by Heroku when Heroku runs our Node application. What we're going to focus on in this video is providing environment variables to our Node application, but when it runs locally on our machine. Now, there are two major reasons why using environment variables is super important. The first has to do with security, and the second has to do with customizability. Let's get started by talking about customization, and to do that, we're going to open up mongoose.js in the DB directory. Inside of here, we have our database URL hard-coded into the application. That means when we run the app locally, it connects to our local database, and so far that's been going really well. But it also means that when we deploy to Heroku, it's still going to try to connect to our local database, which is not going to exist. When we deploy to Heroku, we'll be using another service to set up a professional MongoDB database, and we'll be using that connection string on production. So we have one value we want to provide when running in development, and another value we want to provide when running in production. The answer is to set up an environment variable and provide different values for it when running in development and production. So without environment variables, we would have no way to customize the connection string we're passing to the connect method based off of the environment we're running in, where we have dev locally on our machine and prod or production on the Heroku servers. Now, when it comes to security, we also get a lot of advantages when using environment variables. So as an example, right now, we have a lot of important information hard-coded into our application, such as the API key for SendGrid over in account.js. Now, if we were to leave this right here in the JavaScript file, we would eventually commit this to Git, push it up to GitHub, and push it up to Heroku. Now, if everything goes well, this API key won't fall into the wrong hands, but merely by adding it to our code, we are increasing the chances that at some point, either now or in the future, someone gets access to it. So let me give you an example. My friend just started to learn how to write software, and this is a true story. Now, we create a Discord server for me and my friend group. It's a little group chat. And he was creating a chatbot for that as one of the first real projects he built with Node and JavaScript. Now, he created the application by getting an API key from our Discord chat and using it to build the bot. So he built the bot with a private GitHub repository, and then he wanted to share it with the world, so he went ahead and made that repo public. Now, before he did, he removed the key, switching to environment variables. He committed that, and he pushed it up thinking he was safe. When he made the repo public, though, you got to remember that old commit history, it's still there, and it still contained the Discord API key. Someone somewhere wrote a bot that scrapes them, and they held our Discord chat ransom, asking for 100 Bitcoins. Now, obviously, we didn't pay that. We just went ahead and created a new chat from scratch, and we took security a bit more seriously. So when we have API keys in our code, it's not necessarily dangerous, but it leaves us open to more vulnerabilities in the future. So we're also going to break these out into environment variables, and where those environment variables are defined, that's not going to get committed to the repository, so there's zero chance they ever fall into the wrong hands. Let's go ahead and figure out how we can get this done, and we're going to start with the simplest example in index.js. What we want to do is provide our own environment variable value for port when it runs locally on our machine, so we don't have to hard code the port 3000 right here. The first thing we're going to do is define that separate place for our environment variables, and we're going to put that in a new directory in the Task Manager app. So right here, we're going to create a config folder. Now, the config folder and its contents are going to be ignored by Git using a .gitignore file, much like we did for the Node modules directory when we created the web server app, our weather application. So right here in the new config folder, we're going to add a single file for the moment, and we'll call it dev.env. So this is where we're going to provide the environment variables for that dev environment. And it is a file consisting of key value pairs, one on each line. So right here, I could have key equals value, where I'm now creating a key environment variable with the value. In our case, that's not what we want. We want to set a value for port, and I'm going to set it equal to the value 3000, which is what we're using locally in development. Now, it's important to make sure not to add any extra formatting, including spaces in between the various characters, as that is going to affect how the environment variables are set. You want your file to look exactly like this one. Now from here, that means we won't need to have 3000 right here. We can remove it. The port environment variable is already provided by Heroku. We've seen that. And now our application locally is going to provide that as well. Now currently it doesn't. We have the environment file created, but down below we can see that we're getting undefined as the value for the port from our message right here. Let's go ahead and adjust that by actually using that dev.env file to populate the environment variables for our Node application. Now, setting environment variables is typically a huge pain because each operating system has a different way to get that done. We're going to use an NPM module, though, that allows us to get this done in a cross-OS compatible way, which means your project will work on Windows, Mac, Linux, and Linux distributions. The module we're going to be using, we can find over in the browser by Googling npm -env-cmd. This npm module is going to load in the environment variables we defined in that env file, and then it's going to make sure they're available to our Node.js application, and we're going to go ahead and set this up in our project. So over inside of Visual Studio Code, we want to install this module. Down below, I'll use Control-C to shut down NodeMon, followed by npm install. The module is env-cmd at 8.0.2, and this is a module we only need locally on our machine. It's not something we're going to need on Heroku, so we can use the save dev flag like we did when we installed NodeMon several sections ago. What I'm going to do is go ahead and run that installation command, and then we're going to head over to package.json, as using this module requires us to make a small change to our script. So over here, we have the JSON file, and down below, I can see that env-cmd is installed as a dev dependency, which is great. Up above, it's now our job to tell env-cmd to load in the environment variables and provide them to our project when using the dev script. We're not going to do that for the start script, as the start script is going to run on Heroku, and we'll talk about how we set environment variables on Heroku in the next lesson. For now, all we need to do is make a small change to the dev script. We're going to add some stuff right up front. So we'll leave the same command we had before, just adding a space, and right here, we're going to use env-cmd as a command, and that's provided by the tool we just installed. The next thing we provide is the path to the environment variable file we want to use. Now for us, that is ./config/dev.env. That is the file that we created. And with this in place, we're now done. So now when we run the dev command, env-cmd is going to grab all of those environment variables. Then it's going to continue to run the Node application, but it will provide those environment variables to the app as it's running. Now, the end result is that I should no longer see undefined in the message server is up on port. I should actually see the value I defined over here. Now let's switch things up and change this to 3001 so we can actually see the change. Down below, all I'm going to do is start up the app exactly like I've done dozens of times before, npm run dev. That's going to load in those environment variables, provide them to the Node process, and down below, we can see it's working as expected. NodeMon is still running. We can see its output right here, and we do indeed have the environment variable value. Now, if I were to change that value, it's not going to automatically be detected. env cmd only runs once right away, which means that we just need to restart our program whenever we change an environment variable. And the good news is that once they're set, we're almost never going to change them. Right here, I've tweaked it back to 3000. Down below, I'll use Control-C to shut it down, up and enter to rerun the last command, and this time I would expect to see port 3000 showing up, and that is exactly what I get. So there we go. That's how we can set environment variables for our application when we're just running locally on our machine. Now we're going to do the same thing for the JSON Web Token secret, the SendGrid API key, and the MongoDB connection string. Let's go ahead and work through one more together, then there'll be a challenge for you to do a couple on your own. The one we're going to work through together is the SendGrid API key. So right here, we have the API key hard-coded into the JavaScript file. That is not what we want. I'm going to copy that to the clipboard, and we're going to remove this line entirely. Instead of getting the variable value from the variable we just had, we will instead get it from an environment variable, which means that right here, we'll be accessing process.env.something. Now we can pick whatever name we would like for this one. Let's go ahead and use something specific, like SendGrid _ API _ key. So when naming environment variables, it's common to use all uppercase and to separate the words with underscores. It's not required, it's just a convention. You don't have to follow it, but it's a good idea too. Now we are relying on this environment variable to exist. It currently does not. Let's go ahead and save the program and fix that by defining it over in dev.env. Right here on the next line, that is SendGrid _ API _ key, exactly like we defined it before. And we're setting that equal to the value I copied to the clipboard, making sure that those quotes are not included. Here we just have the API key itself. Now I can save all of the files. Down below, I can manually restart the server, and the API key should still be set correctly, and I should be able to still get emails. Let's go ahead and test that out. Over in Postman, the last thing I did was delete the user a couple of videos ago. Let's go ahead and recreate them, once again, using an email that I actually have access to so we can make sure we get it in our inbox. Right here, I'll go ahead and send that off. Down below, the new user is created. We can move over to Gmail and see what we get. Right over here. In my inbox, I have nothing. Now, as mentioned, there's a decent chance these emails will end up in your spam folder until you configure the custom domain, and here it is. Thanks for joining in, and I have my message showing up, and this is the one from 0 minutes ago, the one I just sent. So the good news here is that the API key is still being set up correctly, and we're still able to send emails even though it's defined over here. Now it's your challenge. You're going to be doing something similar for the JSON Web Token secret and for the MongoDB connection string. Down below, I have a series of comments outlining what I'd like you to do. Right here, what I'd like you to do is pull out the JSON Web Token secret and database URL into environment variables defined in this file. And there are a few steps for getting this done. First up, create those two variables and set the values correctly. You can just copy the existing value for each right out of the code, much like we copied our SendGrid API key from the code that was up above. Then you're going to set up the values in the development env file that we have created and worked with over here. And finally, in the code, you want to swap out those hard-coded values for references to environment variables, just like we did right here on line 3. Last up, test your work. So if you're changing the JWT secret and the database URL, you could test both of those by creating a new user and getting their profile. If I'm able to get the profile, then I know I can communicate with the database correctly. And if my JSON Web Token works when I sign up and then use it, I know that's set correctly as well. All right, knock that out. Test your work. When you're done, come back and click play. How'd that go? Let's go ahead and kick things off with the MongoDB URL, then we'll do the JWT secret. So right here inside of Mongoose.js, we have the connection string we want to use in our development environment. I'm going to copy that to the clipboard, head over to dev.env and create the new environment variable. That is MongoDB underscore URL, setting it equal to the value I just copied to the clipboard. Next up, inside of Mongoose.js, we're going to remove the hard-coded value and reference the environment variable instead. That's process.env.mongodb underscore URL, matching up exactly with what we had sitting right over here. Now, if I save the program, you can see that things are crashing because there is no value provided yet. I have to restart the server for the new invariables to be picked up. We'll go ahead and do that in just a second. Let's go ahead and knock out the other one first. So over inside of the challenge comments, we've taken care of MongoDB for these 3 steps. Let's do the same thing for the JWT secret. Now, we use that in a couple of different places. We use it once in our authentication middleware to verify the token. That's right here. And we use it again inside of the user model when the token is created. Over in that file down below, we have the same value right here. So let's go ahead and work through this process. Over in dev.env, I will create JWT underscore secret, and we can pick whatever value we would like. This is a secret for my app. Perfect. Now, all we're going to do is swap it out with the hard-coded values in those 2 locations. So right here, for the user model, we remove this string and we reference a process.env.jwt underscore secret. We save the program and we do the exact same thing in the auth file when we verify that token later on. Right here, a process.env.underscore jwt env. Perfect. Now that we have this in place, whoops, that's JWT secret. There we go. Sorry for misspeaking right there. Got a little ahead of myself. So now we are referencing the secret, just checking my spelling. Geez, I'm really going crazy. And everything is looking good. And now we can test the application out. So we're going to make sure that we save all of the files. I'm also going to remove these challenge comments, as the last thing to do is to test our work. And down below, yes, it's still failing. We restart the server. It picks up on the new variables we created. And right here, the server is now working, which is a good first step. What we're going to do from here is create another user. Then we're going to go ahead and try to access their profile to test things out. Over inside of Postman, we have our create user request. Now, this email is already registered. I could go ahead and choose to delete them, or I could just switch it up. I'll go ahead and use Andrew3@example.com. I'll save that request, and I'll also switch up my login request to use the same email so that works going forward, though that step's not necessary. Now we're actually going to create the user, so let's go ahead and knock that out by firing off the create user request. They're showing up down below, which is a good first step. Now let's go ahead and make sure we can fetch them using read profile. Right here, I'll read my profile and it's showing up as expected. So this proves that everything is working. I'm able to communicate with the database and my JWTs are getting created and verified correctly. Now that we have this in place, we're really only halfway done. We have these environment variables defined locally, but if we were to push the project to Heroku, only this one would exist. Heroku does not automatically set these. In the next lesson, we're going to deploy this project to Heroku, and we'll learn how to set environment variables for the Heroku app as well. Now, we're also going to be able to do some other fun stuff. We'll figure out how to ignore the config file to make sure that stays out of our Git repo. Let's go ahead and jump right in to the next one.